2:54 a.m., October 12th, 1984, Brighton, England. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is still awake in her suite at the Grand Hotel in the coastal English town of Brighton. Meanwhile, most of her colleagues sleep off travel and meetings in their rooms above. Without warning, a blast rips through the hotel. Walls buckle and floors collapse as an explosion tears through the wall with devastating force. A section of the hotel's facade disintegrates, exposing twisted steel and tattered rooms to the chilly seaside night. The explosion's true weapon is the building itself. A rooftop chimney stack, 11 feet tall and weighing several tons, breaks loose and plunges downward like a monstrous guillotine, slicing through one floor after another. In an instant, peace turns into chaos as the cascade of bricks, marble, and glass crashes through the heart of the hotel. This blast tears a nearly 30-foot wide hole in the structure, and within seconds, an avalanche of debris entombs guests beneath what had moments before been an ornate 19th century hotel. Amid the choking dust and flickering lights, survivors stumble into dark hallways. A telephone switchboard, miraculously still functioning, chugs out unanswered wake-up calls to rooms that no longer exist. A few floors below the explosion, Mrs. Thatcher emerges from her suite with her husband Dennis. Just 2 minutes earlier, she had left the bathroom that is now obliterated. She remains eerily composed, clad in the same evening gown she'd worn to a gala hours before. As panicked Tory party officials gather, Thatcher's voice cuts through the chaos. "I think that was an assassination attempt. Don't you?" she asks calmly, even as plaster dust falls from the ceiling. Emergency sirens wail in the distance while ministers and their spouses, some still in pajamas, others in evening clothes, emerge dazed and bloody into the lobby. To understand how a luxury hotel became a war zone, we must step back to the conflict known as the Troubles. Since the late 1960s, Northern Ireland had been engulfed in violence between Unionists, loyal to British rule, and nationalists seeking a united Ireland. In 1969, after clashes over civil rights, the British Army deployed to Belfast and Derry. Rather than restoring peace, their presence fueled a guerrilla war. Out of this conflict rose the Provisional Irish Republican Army, or IRA, which was formed in 1970. The IRA was a militant nationalist organization vowing to end British governance in Northern Ireland by any means necessary. Over the next decade, the IRA and other paramilitaries waged a bloody campaign of bombings and assassinations. Tit-for-tat violence and harsh counterinsurgency measures turned city streets into battlegrounds. Events like Bloody Sunday in 1972, when British paratroopers shot unarmed protesters, drove many young Catholics into the arms of the IRA. As one IRA recruit later recalled of that era, "We knew who our enemy was. They were pointing the guns at us." By the early 1980s, the Provisional IRA had grown into a sophisticated insurgent force. It maintained an England department, an elite unit dedicated to carrying the war onto British soil. Bombs were no longer confined to Belfast or Derry, they rocked London and other cities. In 1979, the IRA assassinated Lord Mountbatten, cousin of the Queen. This was done with a boat bomb and killed 18 British soldiers in a single day, shattering any illusion that the conflict would be contained to Ireland. British governments, whether Labour or Conservative, became targets of IRA plots. Margaret Thatcher loomed large in this conflict. Elected Prime Minister in 1979, just weeks after the IRA killed her close political ally Ari Neve in a car bombing, Thatcher cast herself as the uncompromising foe of the IRA. She vowed to, quote, "destroy this evil," end quote, of terrorism, and refused to bend in the face of violence. In 1981, IRA prisoners in the Maze prison went on hunger strikes led by Bobby Sands, demanding recognition as political prisoners. Thatcher's response was chillingly firm. Crime is crime, it is not political. Eventually letting Sands and 9 others starve to death rather than concede their political status. This inflexibility made her a hate figure amongst Irish Republicans. After 1981, the IRA's Army Council decided that striking directly at Thatcher herself would be the ultimate retribution. She was, in their eyes, the embodiment of British rule, the most reviled British leader since Cromwell. Killing the Iron Lady and her cabinet would be an unprecedented blow, the most audacious attack on the British government since the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. The stage was set for a collision between an immovable object and an unstoppable force. Thatcher's resolve versus the IRA's quest for vengeance. Patrick McGahey was the man the IRA tasked to slay the Prime Minister. A Belfast native born in 1951, McGee had spent part of his youth in England, an upbringing that left him with a disarmingly authentic English accent. Like many of his generation, he was radicalized by the early years of the Troubles. At 19, McGee was arrested and beaten by British forces during a roundup of Catholic civilians following Bloody Sunday. That experience cemented his path. He joined the Provisional IRA and proved to be a meticulous and daring operative, a natural fit for the IRA's clandestine operations on British soil. McGee possessed a patient, puzzle-solving mind and a reputation for taking bold risks. His comrades nicknamed him the Chancer, based on the calculated gambles he took in carrying out his missions. By the 1980s, McGee had become a skilled bomb maker, or engineer in IRA parlance, involved in several attacks and constantly on the move to evade capture. On the other side of this crosshair stood Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady herself. The IRA, she was not just the head of the British government, but the living symbol of everything they opposed. Thatcher's hardline policies in Northern Ireland, from deploying troops and backing aggressive police interrogations to refusing compromise during the hunger strikes, convinced the IRA that she would never understand the issues behind their struggle. In her public statements, Thatcher denounced the IRA as cowardly criminals and adamantly ruled out negotiating with quote-unquote terrorists. She prided herself on personal toughness, but this only hardened the IRA's resolve to eliminate her. If they could kill Thatcher, they believed, it would avenge their dead, throw the British state into disarray, and prove that no enemy, not even the Iron Lady, was beyond their reach. For McGee and his IRA unit, Thatcher became a fixation. They began shadowing the Prime Minister's public appearances from afar, looking for vulnerabilities. As early as 1977, McGee himself had been part of a team quietly scouting a party conference in Brighton, at that time targeting officials of the rival Labour Party government. That operation never went ahead, but it did lay the groundwork for what would happen in the future. After Thatcher came to power, and especially after 1981, planning intensified. The IRA's England department spent 2 years crafting an elaborate assassination plot. They surveilled the annual Conservative Party conferences in 1982 and 1983, noting venues, security patterns, and the Prime Minister's routine. In 1984, the Tories returned to Brighton to convene at the Seafront Grand Hotel, a venerable, upscale venue that hosted the party leadership each autumn. For the IRA, this presented a golden opportunity. Thatcher and her entire cabinet would be sleeping together in one easily accessible location outside the high-security bubble of London. McGee was dispatched as the tip of the spear. In late September 1984, Patrick McGee traveled to the English seaside under a false identity. At the Brighton Grand Hotel's reception, he signed in the register as Roy Walsh. It was a simple ruse, perhaps too simple. Unbeknownst to the hotel staff, Roy Walsh was the name of a real Belfast IRA man who at that very moment sat behind bars in an English prison. Choosing an alias already infamous to British authorities was a brazen touch, one that risked exposing the plot. Years later, IRA planners would marvel at McGee's audacity. For some extraordinary reason, he chose the name of one of the London bombers. McGee may have intended it as a tribute to a fellow IRA operative or a taunt to British intelligence. Either way, if security had checked the guest list against known IRA names, the pseudonym could have raised a red flag. Luckily for McGee, they did not. For 3 days, the soft-spoken Irishman posing as Mr. Walsh kept a low profile in room 629 on the 6th floor. He allowed the chambermaids to clean around his room as needed, careful not to arouse suspicion. In privacy, McGee set about building his bomb. Components had been smuggled into England and assembled piece by piece in room 629. The device was massive by IRA standards, dozens of sticks of gelignite, a commercial explosive, packed into a portable metal container with a timer attached. The long delay timer was a marvel of improvisation, designed to tick away for more than 3 weeks before detonating. McGee delicately assembled the bomb and then hid it behind a removable panel beneath the bathtub in his ensuite bathroom. This location was chosen with lethal calculation. Directly below the tub lay a main structural element of the Grand Hotel, the base of an enormous chimney stack built into the hotel's facade. An explosives expert who later examined the site noted that McGee had placed the device at a critical juncture, effectively turning the building's own Victorian infrastructure into a weapon. By September 30th, 1984, McGee had everything in place. Before checking out, he set the timer for 24 days, 6 hours, and 36 minutes, calibrating it so the bomb would explode in the early morning hours of October 12th, right when the Conservative Party conference was in full swing and Thatcher would be in the hotel. Then the IRA operative quietly left Brighton. His deadly package concealed under the bathtub, he slipped into the darkness. For over 3 weeks, the bomb lay in wait. During that time, hundreds of guests and even a bomb-sniffing police dog team passed through the Grand Hotel, oblivious to the silent menace hiding in room 629. The Conservatives arrived for their conference, checked into their usual suites, including the Prime Minister, into the first-floor Napoleon suite, 5 floors directly below McGee's planted bomb. British Security Service had indeed performed a routine sweep of the building before Thatcher's arrival, but it was only cursory. Focused on more obvious threats like protesters or the ongoing miners' strike, the police did not think to scrutinize the hotel's recent guest log or pry open any bathtub panels. As one commentator noted, it was a failure of imagination. Nobody since Guy Fawkes had tried to blow up the government. McGee's gamble had paid off. All that remained was to wait for the timer to run down. In the pre-dawn darkness of October 12th, the IRA's long-laid plan was realized. At 2:54 a.m., McGee's hidden bomb burst to life, shattering the peaceful resort night. The detonation was centered in a vertical shaft of the Grand Hotel structure, maximizing destructive impact. The floor of room 629 disintegrated. The massive chimney stack attached to the hotel's front was knocked loose and imploded downward, turning into a torrent of brick and masonry that cut through the building's core with knife-like precision. Floor after floor, the collapsing chimney punched a jagged hole straight to ground level, shearing off the facade facing Brighton's beach. Entire rooms were obliterated, while their guests remained asleep. Doors, beams, and furniture were tossed about like confetti, and guests never knew what hit them. On the 6th floor, just feet from the bomb, the blast instantly killed Jean Shattuck, the 55-year-old wife of a senior Conservative official. Directly beneath, in room 528, Eric Taylor, a regional party chairman, was crushed by the falling floors. 1 floor below that, the suite of the government chief whip, John Wakeham, collapsed into rubble. Wakeham survived the collapse, but his wife, Roberta, perished. In room 328, Sir Anthony Berry, the deputy chief whip, and a prominent member of parliament, was fatally injured by the collapse. Sir Anthony had moments earlier returned from walking his dogs. Now he lay amid the ruins, one of 5 people to lose their lives in the attack. His wife, Lady Berry, was buried under rubble with a broken pelvis, although rescue crews later found her when they heard the barking of the couple's dogs trapped nearby. Miraculously, not everyone in the direct path was killed. In room 228, directly above Thatcher's suite, Trade Secretary Norman Tebbit and his wife Margaret Tebbit plunged downward as their room collapsed. Norman Tebbit, one of Thatcher's closest allies, was pulled from the debris alive. Battered by falling beams, his wife Margaret was also rescued, but she sustained serious injuries that left her permanently paralyzed. All told, the bombing killed 5 people, including an MP, party chairman, and the spouses of 3 senior Conservatives, and wounded 34 others, many seriously. Yet the attack failed in its primary objective. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her husband were physically unhurt. In a stroke of almost unbelievable luck, the avalanche of wreckage veered slightly off course as it descended. Instead of crashing through the first floor directly into Thatcher's bedroom, the falling chimney stack sheared off and devastated the adjacent bathroom of her suite. Moments before the blast, Thatcher had been in that bathroom, but by pure chance, she had returned to her desk just 2 minutes earlier. As it was, the Prime Minister's bathroom was demolished. Pipes burst and water sprayed everywhere. Yet, in the next room, Margaret Thatcher remained standing, shaken, but alive. In the immediate aftermath, confusion and terror reigned. Survivors stumbled through the smoke and dust, many dazed or bloody. Fire alarms blared and water gushed from broken pipes as firefighters and police rushed in. Rescuers formed human chains to dig through tons of rubble in search of voices crying out from beneath. Amid this chaos, Thatcher, clad in a blue nightdress beneath a coat, appeared in the lobby to coordinate with aides. Witnesses recall her projecting an almost uncanny calm. When an aide suggested she leave the site for her safety, she flatly refused. Hours later, as day broke over Brighton's shattered seafront, the Prime Minister gave an impromptu interview. Her hand trembling slightly, she admitted,
"You hear about these atrocities, these bombs. You don't expect them to happen to you."
But almost in the same breath, Thatcher's defiance resurfaced. Asked how the government would respond, she steadied herself and said,
"The conference will go on as usual."
And indeed it did. Just 6.5 hours after the bomb exploded, Margaret Thatcher marched onto the conference stage at the Brighton Centre to a standing ovation. Bruised colleagues and delegates cheered, some wiping away tears. In a powerful address that afternoon, Thatcher's voice rang with resolve. All attempts to destroy democracy by terrorism will fail. The audience erupted. Even many of her political enemies begrudgingly admired her courage that day. The IRA's bomb had reduced a wing of the Grand Hotel to ruin, but it had not tarnished the Iron Lady's steel image. Meanwhile, back in Belfast, the IRA acknowledged their failed assassination attempt with a chilling mixture of regret and menace. The very next day, the Provisional IRA issued a statement claiming responsibility. Addressing Thatcher directly, the statement warned, "Today we were unlucky. But remember, you only have to be lucky once. You will have to be lucky always. Give Ireland peace, and there will be no more war." The message was clear. They had missed their mark this time, but they would be back. In the wreckage of the Grand Hotel, as rescue workers toiled to save the injured, a parallel effort was underway: the hunt for the bomber. Police and forensic experts converged on Brighton from London, determined to uncover who had nearly wiped out the government. Clue number 1 was lying amid the debris stacked at the hotel's front desk. The registration cards filled out by guests. Detectives hastily gathered the charred and dust-covered cards, scrutinizing each name against the rooms that had been destroyed. They honed in on room 629, the source of the blast. The guest who had occupied that room weeks before signed in under the name Roy Walsh. Investigators immediately ran checks on this mysterious Mr. Walsh. A team of detectives visited the address in London that the guest had provided for his hotel room, only to discover no one there had ever heard of a Roy Walsh. Quickly realizing Roy Walsh was an alias, police moved to a painstaking strategy: forensics and public appeals. Forensics teams, led by veteran Scotland Yard experts like Detective Superintendent David Tadd, sifted through every gram of evidence from room 629. In an era before DNA profiling, this meant methodically searching for fingerprints or any trace the bomber might have left behind. Tadd was famed for his patience. He and his colleagues would spend 15-hour days combing through rubble with magnifying glasses and brushes. As journalist Rory Carroll later described, they were trying to match a smudge of a thumb to a name in Scotland Yard's vast archive of terrorist suspect files. It was a monumental task, literally looking for a fingerprint in the dust of an explosion. Initial results were frustrating. The bomber had been clever. No obvious fingerprints were found in the blown-apart bathroom or on remnants of the device itself, but a significant clue emerged from the hotel registration card itself. Though the card had been handled by many people, from the guest to the receptionist, there remained on it a partial palm print that could belong to the mysterious Mr. Walsh. Investigators lifted this print and began the tedious process of comparing it against known criminal records. Days turned into weeks, and in the meantime, police turned to the public for any help they could get. BBC's Crime Watch, a television program in the United Kingdom, broadcast as an appeal displaying a sketch of the man known as Roy Walsh and asking anyone with information to come forward. The name itself, Roy Walsh, was also blasted across the media. An unusual move that even caught the attention of the real Roy Walsh in prison, who was puzzled to hear police hunting for someone with his name. But despite tips and rumors, the identity of the Brighton bomber remained elusive through late 1984. At Scotland Yard, David Tadd's persistence finally paid off. On January 17, 1985, roughly 3 months after the bombing, Tadd finally got a breakthrough. He matched 16 unique points on the recovered palm print to the print on file for a known IRA suspect, Patrick Magee. After months of dogged work, the smudge of a thumb had a name. British intelligence agencies were alerted that Patrick Joseph Magee, then 33 years old, was already wanted for questioning in other IRA attacks and had been under surveillance sporadically in the previous years. In the spring of 1985, as investigators quietly tracked Magee's known associates, a tip came from across the Irish Sea. Magee had been spotted in Belfast, then seemingly vanished. In fact, he had slipped back into England under yet another alias. On June 22, 1985, in the city of Glasgow, police raided a flat in the Queen's Park district and found Magee hiding inside with 4 other IRA members. The men had been assembling bombs for a Fresh Terror campaign, a planned bombing blitz on English soil. The arrest was dramatic. The team of detectives and special branch officers stormed the safe house, capturing the suspects before they could resist. Among the items seized was a notebook, a bomber's calendar of sorts, detailing future targets and intended dates. Magee's long run was finally over. A photograph taken that night shows him being led away in handcuffs, a slight, bearded man in a windbreaker, hardly matching the image of the arch-villain that almost destroyed United Kingdom's government. Magee and his co-conspirators were transferred to London to face justice. In September 1986, after a trial at the Old Bailey, Patrick Magee was convicted on multiple counts of murder and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic proof of the palm print, surveillance links to the Glasgow plot, and Magee's long IRA pedigree. The judge announced a stern sentence: 8 life terms, 1 for each of the 5 dead, and 1 for each of the other charges, with a minimum of 35 years to be served before any consideration of release. In practical terms, it was effectively a life sentence. For Britain, the Brighton bomber was behind bars, and justice, so it seemed, had been delivered. The Brighton bombing sent shockwaves far beyond the immediate carnage. Politically, it tested the resolve of the British government and shaped the trajectory of Northern Ireland's conflict in unexpected ways. In the short term, Thatcher's narrow escape only hardened her famously tough stance on the IRA. To the public, Thatcher's survival became the stuff of legend. The Iron Lady, unbowed, had survived a bombing that had failed to decapitate the government. And instead, Britain's resolve, at least on the surface, appeared stronger than ever. However, behind the scenes, the Brighton attack also underscored a pressing reality. The Northern Ireland conflict needed a political solution. Just 1 year after the bombing, in November 1985, Prime Minister Thatcher and Irish leader Garret FitzGerald signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement. This accord gave the Republic of Ireland an advisory role in Northern Irish affairs, a significant diplomatic step that acknowledged nationalistic concerns in the north. Gerry Adams of Sinn Féin, the IRA's political wing, defended the attack as a legitimate act of war. Yet, the sight of elderly legislators' wives being pulled from the rubble gave pause to many. The ultimate legacy of the Brighton bombing came a decade and a half later, in the form of peace and reconciliation. After years more of conflict, the Good Friday Agreement was signed in April 1998, officially bringing an end to the Troubles. As part of that peace deal, both Republican and Loyalist prisoners were granted early release. Thus, in an incredible twist of fate, Patrick Magee, the Brighton bomber, walked free in 1999, having served just 14 years of his life sentences. He was released under the same Good Friday Agreement that his lethal act in 1984 may have derailed had Thatcher died. In Brighton today, the Grand Hotel stands rebuilt and elegant. but it wears its history on its sleeve. A plaque in the lobby commemorates the victims of the 1984 bombing. What if the bomb's timing had been slightly different? What if Margaret Thatcher had been killed? How might the course of the Northern Ireland conflict, and indeed British history, have changed? Those questions will always linger. Thank you so much for watching.